oppose the regulations, first of all in the way that they have been set out. And I have to say, noble lords, the issue has united communities from all backgrounds in Northern Ireland, and how the Secretary of State has dealt with these regulations that was laid before Parliament on the 6th of June 2023 to require the teaching of relationships, sexual education in Northern Ireland, covering abortion and the reduction of teenage pregnancy for key stage 3 and 4, which will require the Department of Education to introduce a new RSE curriculum for post-primary schools in Northern Ireland without any real consultation or prior warning. My lords, most people would have believed, given the huge controversial nature of these regulations, the strong views expressed against this policy, a full public consultation would have been necessary. And where similar regulations were introduced in England, were subject to a public consultation before implementation, which has already been stated by other noble lords. And where similar controversial regulations on abortion were introduced in Northern Ireland. And I believe the Northern Ireland Office has not offered any real convincing reason why these regulations should be treated any differently. My lords, the lack of consultation was also the criticism from teachers, parents and school governors, as well as representative organisations from across Northern Ireland. And I certainly agree with the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. The school governing bodies and principals should have been consulted, because they will be the organisations charged with implementing the policy. And the absence of consultation was partly stricken, and this has already been, I suppose, motivated and raised in view of the court's judgment in a judicial review of earlier Northern Ireland abortion regulations, which the court said in the event that regulations or directions are made in the future to deal with education and sexual reproduction health, then there will be an opportunity for the Secretary of State to carry out a consultative process. Thus today, my lords, parents or teachers or children in Northern Ireland, you're not only looking at regulations resting on parents with legislation imposed very much over their heads. You're also looking at regulation proceeding with no primary legislation debate in terms of regulations making powers as applies to education, whatever, in relation to which the Secretary of State has even bothered to consult. My lords, the democratic deficit in relation to these regulations is therefore worse than that relating to the abortion regulations, both because there was no debate about it in Parliament, because there has been no consulting process. And we have the Secretary of State imposing a series of measures on the people of Northern Ireland, on the educational system in Northern Ireland, with no real consideration for their wishes and views. My lords, education is a devolved matter. Schools in Northern Ireland already provide relationship and sex education. These regulations before us this afternoon amount to a cavalier approach to children and young people's education in Northern Ireland. And it was said earlier that the Secretary of State has the power. And yes, we would all agree he has the power. It's how he uses that power. And I have to say, over the last while since he came to Northern Ireland, he's used that power in a very cavalier manner on issues. This is a Secretary of State that doesn't believe in consensus whatsoever on many issues. And he would quote the Belfast Agreement on occasions in and around consensus And right through the Belfast Agreement, they continually call and talk about consensus. This Secretary of State, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to want to find consensus on any issue. And there's a litany of issues that you could name and look at that this Secretary of State, for whatever reason, seems to be able to get most people in Northern Ireland and all the political parties against him. And he seems to be quite happy in doing that, and does it quite well. And I would ask the Secretary of State, he needs to have a rethink in how he deals with Northern Ireland, and especially the issues in Northern Ireland. And former Secretary of States will tell you, and people who know Northern Ireland very well, the only way Northern Ireland will move forward is by consensus, not a cavalier attitude to issues such as this.